They're doing what? But, like, with each other? Well, what if the world finds out? Yeah, I know. Okay. October 12th, 1940. They have a unified front to the rest of the world, publicly dismissing any talk of a civil war in the face of invasion. But this week, the Chinese Nationalists and Communists fight each other. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Adolf Hitler met with Benito Mussolini and talked about possible military plans in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Gibraltar. Far to the east, the Battle of 100 Regiments is devolving into guerrilla warfare. In Warsaw, all Jews are ordered to move into the ghetto, and there were a few changes in British high command. That continued this week. On the 9th, Prime Minister Winston Churchill becomes leader of Britain's Conservative Party, as I said last week. This is an impressive achievement because he was little liked by many in the party at the time of his selection as Prime Minister. He has succeeded in winning their loyalty, despite the hard times he has presided over. His attention to party affairs illustrates his concern for the forms of parliamentary democracy. Churchill has been Prime Minister since before the ongoing Battle of Britain began, and there is a major development in that this week. On the 12th, as the week ends, any German invasion of Britain at all is officially postponed until at least the spring. The Germans could keep coming over all they liked, but they were not going to win. Neither Goering nor Hitler had any idea of the true strength of fighter command, but they now began to accept the great battle against Britain had failed. All that effort, all that cost, it had come to nothing. Air operations over Britain would continue, but Hitler was now ever more set upon his next course of action. If Britain could not be brought to heel now, then she would once the Soviet Union had been absorbed into the Third Reich. But continue those air operations do, by both sides. On the 7th comes the heaviest British air raid on Berlin so far. 30 Wellington and 12 Whitley bombers drop 50 tons of high-explosive bombs. On the 11th, Liverpool is heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe. 4 ships are sunk in port. But what is guiding the German air operations now, if not the prospect of victory by invasion or by aerial supremacy? Well, many in the German high command think that the continued bombing will have a big political impact, and that a brutal terror campaign against the major British cities and the food supply chain can actually win the Battle of Britain. This strategy comes from Italian General Giulio Douhet. He wrote The Command of the Air back in 1921, which has had a huge influence on air forces and aerial strategy ever since. One thing he wrote about was the effect bombing could have on morale. See, he identified 5 target types for bombing: government, industry, communications, transport, and the will of the people. And that last one is really important to him. Destroying civilians' homes will destroy their morale, and this in turn would lead to their resistance failing and the social fabric of the society beginning to unravel. Then when they ran out of basic consumer goods, they would rise up against their own government and have a revolution, and then make peace with the attacker. His theories, however, were never put to the test in the 20s and 30s. And it's turning out now that his estimates for how much bombing would destroy a city were extremely optimistic. He wrote in 1928 that 300 tons of bombs dropped over a capital city would end a war in a month. So that would be 10 tons a day or so. But we've seen many single days with dozens of tons of bombs dropped, 50 tons in one day this week, and that has not ended the war. Douhet, though, does have a fair amount of followers in German high command. Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop's Foreign Office thinks that a terror bombing campaign will drive the inhabitants of London's East End into the more posh West End, and its inhabitants will make peace because they'll be scared of a social revolution. Well, that is a bit fanciful. But how is it actually for the British people? They are trying, and in large part succeeding, in maintaining a sense of normalcy. The familiar images of workers and shoppers picking their way through bomb debris each morning is mute testimony to the efforts made to reassert the rhythms of ordinary life. The Daily Express ran a campaign under the caption, "Don't be a bomb bore," when the Ministry of Information began to compile a list of questions the public are asking in October, the newsletters were full of mundane inquiries. Are animals allowed in shelters? Are people liable to pay rent and rates if their houses are made uninhabitable? Was there compensation for the loss of false teeth, spectacles, gas masks? So life is going on with a semblance of everyday mundanity. Something interesting I read in Richard Overy's The Battle of Britain. British Home Intelligence discovers that there are as many calls for bombing reprisal raids against Italy as there are against Germany, and there is little sustained Germanophobia in Britain. Calls for reprisal against anybody, though, in fact, died down this month, and those calls that there are more prominent in areas that have not been bombed. The bombing now comes at night, which changes defenses, of course. Fighter Command has a night fighter force, mostly Beaufighters and Blenheims, but without quality airborne radar, most contact with the enemy is by chance. So the anti-aircraft gun is the main defense. Thing is, it's tougher to use at night, too. From July to September, for example, AA batteries destroyed 337 airplanes, but only 104 at night. And they estimated that they fired 10 times as many shells per plane. And starting from around now, half of the German casualties will result from accidents that are caused by bad weather or ice. Still, a high proportion of the German bombers make it through and hit their targets. There still is, as Douay theorized, no really effective way of preventing bombing. Even inflicting heavy losses on the attacker does not prevent bombing. But, and here's the thing, bombers only carry tiny loads in comparison to the size of major cities. And there aren't really that many of them. And their targets are seriously scattered far and wide. Germany did not, except for a couple of weeks in August attacking airfields, attack any target system repeatedly. Ports, industrial targets, communications, it was all scattered. British intelligence did an analysis of this at the end of September and called the results remarkably small in proportion to the considerable effort expended. They came to the conclusion that since there was no overall bombing strategy, the Luftwaffe was bombing them primarily to hurt morale, and this they have failed to do. There is another fight going on this week, though, one on the ground in the Far East. I briefly mentioned last week that the Chinese Nationalist and Communist armies started fighting each other, in spite of their declared united front against the invading Japanese. This is at Guangzhou in Jiangsu province. I'm going to backtrack a bit here. Back in July, Communist leader Mao Zedong had wanted to put pressure on Nationalist General Han Deqin in Jiangsu. So Communist forces under Su Yu had gone on the march, crossing the Yangtze River and destroying a small nationalist force at Guangzhou. Deqin had retaliated in early September with an unsuccessful small attack, but had by last week gathered a larger force for a major attack: Li Xiaowei's 89th Corps and Wang Da's 6th Independent Brigade. Su Yu's communist force prepared to defend against them at Guangzhou, but on the 4th, they ambushed Wang Da's brigade as it advanced and routed it. Wang Da committed suicide. After this, on the 5th, they launched a 3-column attack on the 89th Corps, and by midnight, this too was turning into a rout. Li Xiaowei ordered a general retreat, during which he himself actually drowned in the Bachihe River, and at least 5,000 nationalist troops were killed. Well, that's one version. Peter Chen says that the nationalists, some 30,000 strong, attacked the 4th, and though they did suffer some initial setbacks against a far smaller communist force, some 7,000 men, by the end of the day, they were on the verge of taking the town when Li Xiaowei stopped his advance. On the 5th, the communists counterattacked and did so brilliantly, capturing 30 senior officers, 600 junior officers, 180 machine guns, and 59 mortars. They took just 900 casualties and inflicted 11,000. Effectively destroying the nationalist 89th Army Corps. Chen says Li Xiaowei died in action. Within days, the communists consolidated, occupying Haiyan, Dongtai, and Jiangyan as the nationalists fled the area. In yet another version, a brief one, Hans van de Ven says Han Deqin stood firm at Guangzhou, though he did lose thousands of troops. One thing everyone agrees on, though: both sides suppressed and downplayed any reports of this battle, since they are supposed to be fighting side by side against the Japanese. So we've seen action in the skies this week and action on land, but there's also action at sea. On the 12th comes the Battle of Cape Passero in the Mediterranean. The British light cruiser Ajax takes on first 3 Italian torpedo boats and then 4 Italian destroyers. 2 of the torpedo boats are sunk and 1 gets away. When the destroyers then turn up, 2 of them take heavy damage, but the Ajax disengages after taking damage itself. 1 of the damaged destroyers is sunk a few hours later by the British cruiser HMS York. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 7th, German troops enter Romania. This is the military mission I mentioned last month that is ostensibly to reorganize the Romanian army, but is in reality there to protect the oil fields. That same day, Germany orders all Jews in occupied France to register with the authorities. And on the 11th, Philippe Pétain, leader of Vichy France, broadcasts to the French that they should abandon their traditional ideas as to who are their friends and who are their enemies. And that is the week. A naval battle in the Mediterranean, yet more aerial bombing of Britain and Germany, the Chinese Nationalists fighting the Chinese Communists in the field. That broadcast by Pétain is somehow apropos. Just 2 weeks ago, the Free French attacked the Vichy French at Dakar. And now look at China, also countrymen fighting countrymen. The Chinese have been fighting the Japanese on their own territory for over 3 years now, and they present a united front to the world, even as they fight each other. So who is the real enemy then? Other Chinese? The Japanese? I don't know, but it seems to me that in order to win a war, one thing you must first do is identify the actual enemy. If you'd like to know more about the relations between the Chinese Communists and Nationalists, we made several extensive videos about them in our Between Two Wars series. The first one is right here, any second now. Our patron of the week is Ferry Blumbergen. Be like Ferry and support us at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And check out our Instagram page at World War II Real Time. It covers the war day by day in real time. And subscribe, share, click the bell. See you next time.